Who are going to be the Philadelphia Eagles kick returners with the NFL's new kickoff rule in place? We'll get into that. Plus, Marc Farzetta joins me on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Eagles fans? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. And we're brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. What's up, everybody? Welcome into the podcast. 2 days away from a real Eagles game to discuss. They're in Baltimore, Maryland on Friday for their preseason opener against the Baltimore Ravens. I know you all are probably wondering thoughts about the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni story from Tim McManus. I dove into all of that with Marc Farzetta. I'm sure you guys are very aware of Marc Farzetta from the Philadelphia media market, from 97.5 The Fanatic, Jacob Media, The Farzy Show on Twitter. Well, he's going to be hosting our Locked On Sports Philadelphia podcast, our postcast as well for Locked On Eagles. So I had him jump on the show for segments 2 and 3 to get into all the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts talk heading into a massive season. But before I do get into that, the NFL has a new kickoff rule, and we saw it in place for the first time during the Hall of Fame game. This was taken from the XFL, which is the one nice thing about those other pro football leagues is it really has nothing to do with like the talent. Although my boy Hakeem Butler over there got an NFL contract. Greg Ward came over from the AAF, right? I think before signing with Philadelphia, before he was a hero in 2019. But overall, I like those leagues because they're creative. They're trying to stand out. So they have all these new rules that the NFL is too conservative to create on their own. And one of them was this kickoff rule, where if you're not familiar with it, although you probably should be by now, but if you're not, so kickers are still lining up on the opposing 35-yard line, or I should say their own 35. But now the kickoff team is on the opposing 40. And then you have the receiving team's blockers in between the 30 and the 35. So the kicker kicks the ball. Those kickoff defenders cannot, and I'm doing a terrible job of, but just stick with me. Those defenders cannot move until the ball is moved by the returner. The ball has to be returned if it's in that zone of the 20-yard line in between the 20 and the end zone. If it trickles back into the end zone from that live zone, the returner can then either return it or kneel it. But if they kneel it, the ball is on the 30. So kickers are not going to want to have it in the end zone because a touchback is now, it went from the 20 to the 25. Now it's on the 30 to encourage more kickoffs, right? If it is in that live zone in between the 20 and the end zone, the returner has to return the ball. If the ball goes from back behind the end zone, like the touchback, it's going to start at the 30-yard line. So it reduces injuries without the head start. It encourages more returns because the kicker is not going to want the ball at the 30, and you have to return it if it's in between the 20 and the 1. I really like this new rule. I think it's genius from the XFL. I think the NFL was smart to adopt it, to fix what is basically a non-existent play that's just honestly a waste of time at this point. And I just think it's really fascinating. But I think there's a new strategy to it, right? Because without the head start, with the blockers kind of up front, it's almost like an offensive and defensive line now with just kind of like straight up blocking. I think you might have a different approach to like who will be your returners. I think a lot of teams are going to prefer running backs now, guys that are good in short areas with explosiveness, good vision, cutting ability. It might not just be the guy that runs a 4.2 that just runs really well in a straight line like that fast. I think there's still going to be those kind of guys you want out there. Like I think the Eagles will give John Ross a shot back there, Paris Campbell as well. But I kind of like the idea, and they have been trying out pretty much everybody. I really like the idea of give me one fast guy, because you can also have two returners in the end zone, by the way, at all times. Give me Isaiah Rodgers with that 4.28 speed, or Cooper DeJean. Whoever is not starting for the defense, I would like one of those guys as a returner. Cooper DeJean was a really good returner at Iowa. Isaiah Rodgers, actually, the last time he played with the Colts in 2022, he took a kickoff to the house with the Colts against the Bears 2 years ago. Again, super fast. Like, give me Isaiah Rodgers or Cooper DeJean. And then I do like the idea of having a running back there. And I would actually rather have Will Shipley over Kenneth Gainwell. I don't know. Kenneth Gainwell, to me, isn't as dynamic in space as I thought he would be coming out of Memphis. Will Shipley is. I think he is more of that. Nick Sirianni compared him to Danny Woodhead the other day. He definitely has that short area burst, good vision. He returned kicks at Clemson. I like the idea of a corner and then like a Will Shipley. Like, give me a Cooper DeJean, Will Shipley rookie combo, or maybe an Isaiah Rodgers, Will Shipley. But the other guy I do want to see get a shot, he just needs to play better receiver, though, so he can make the roster, is fifth-round rookie from Texas A&M, Ainias Smith. Another guy that was his tape in college as a returner was really impressive. So maybe that's where he creates his niche this year. Kind of like a guy that didn't work out a receiver, but was an okay returner back in the day, like a Josh Huff early on, or John Hightower, Quez Watkins type. Like, give me Ainias Smith back there in the preseason. Let's see if he can be that guy. I thought about maybe just having Britton Covey just be your ultimate returner, punts and kicks, because he's so good at it. And with the new rule, I think Britton Covey actually better translates as a kickoff returner this year than he did last year. But I do think you want to keep him healthy. And if he's playing more wide receiver 3, maybe you do reduce his workload a little bit and you have a different 1-2 punch here. But the Eagles do have a lot of options as a returner. Like, you could also, again, like I said, maybe throw there John Ross, Paris Campbell, a more fast guy, right? I do think there are a lot of options, and that's exciting. I think this rule is perfect for the NFL, and the Eagles got back to finally being a solid return team last year. It was years of them just being just terrible in that department. And growing up, they were always elite in that way with Deshaun Jackson and Darren Sproles. And even, heck, you'd see Chris Polk take one to the house, or Wendell Smallwood, Josh Huff. And they just weren't that team for years, even Kenyon Barner in 2017. But from like 2018 to 2022, this was not a good return team. Last year, Britton Covey was amazing in that way. The kickoff return team, it's time for them now to get some explosive plays going. I think this is the year, and they have a lot of options because all the guys I mentioned, like Isaiah Rodgers has taken one to the house. Britton Covey is an elite returner. Will Shipley did it in college. Ainias Smith did it in college. Cooper DeJean did it in college. Kenneth Gainwell did it in college at the NFL level. I do think this rule is going to really help the Eagles and the personnel they have. All right, guys, enough about the returners, though. Let's get into my conversation with Marc Farzetta, who's joining us on the Locked On Podcast Network in the Philadelphia market. Big story came out today. A lot of information we already knew, but some more in-depth information about the divide between Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni last year. I'll get into that and more with Marc Farzetta coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, but not just the MLB. I bought my tickets for Eagles Saints in New Orleans through Game Time, saved up to 60% buying last-minute tickets for that game. You can buy anything in the sports world: concerts, comedy, theater. Plus, on top of the great price, you're going to get a great view. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or the NFL or whatever you fancy with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create that account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, guys, joining us now on the Locked On Eagles podcast. You're going to be hearing from him a lot throughout the season with our new Locked On Sports Philadelphia podcast. You can also hear him on our postcast for Locked On Eagles after the games all season long. You've heard him on 97.5 The Fanatic, Jacob Sports Media, of course, the Farzy Show as well. It's Marc Farzetta. Marc, welcome to the show. Welcome to the network, man. We're excited to have you on the team.
It's good to be on the team, man. Greatly appreciated. Great to join such a professional such as yourself and join the rest of the party when it comes to this Philadelphia Eagles season.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We were talking about it before the show. Between now, Gino Camilleri, Lou DiBiase, Marc Farzetta, a very Italian, the most Italian Eagles podcast trio, maybe ever.
We will spare the listeners, and we will make sure that we do this in English. All right, so
I'll try to hold on to my hands too. I think Italians, we love to talk with our hands.
Oh, they're firm on the table, man. I don't want to start this. You know what I mean?
Let's try to control it. So, Mark, obviously, the vibes at camp so far, it seemed like they're great. Actually, I'm not sure if you're a camp stats guy, but Jalen Hurts, according to some, just passed the most consecutive passes in camp of all time without an interception at 158. So between that and the roster looks fresh, young, exciting, fast. What's your personal vibe, though, after such a historic collapse last year? Have they done enough on paper and so far throughout camp to make you feel like last year won't be repeated? Like, where's your head at just a few days away from the first preseason game?
My head's in a great place right now, but it'll even be in a better place after we have the parade for no interceptions at training camp. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it goes up Broad Street, up the Parkway to the Art Museum, and then it'll be great. It'll be great.
I don't know if Jason Kelsey's gonna have a speech, but we'll see.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be nice if he did, though. Hey, I wouldn't doubt it. He's got a speech for everything, that guy.
That's true. That's true.
No, I feel great about this Eagles season. My biggest question mark is the relationship between the center and the quarterback. Cam Jurgens, I got all the confidence in the world that he could do a lot of the same physical things that Jason Kelsey could do, and we've seen a little bit of that at camp to this point, just as far as all of a sudden you blink and he's 10 yards upfield making blocks. So physically, I feel like he can do a lot of the same things. It's going to take a minute before this guy can catch up to anything close to the Hall of Fame level that Jason Kelsey was operating at last year and in recent memory here in Philadelphia. So I want to see what that communication is like between Jalen Hurts and Cam Jurgens. But other than that, I have a lot of confidence in this Eagles team. I think the defense is going to be a big upgrade from last year. I think this Eagles offense, I don't think we're going to be talking a lot about point differential this year. I think this Eagles offense is going to be putting up some huge points throughout the season. And I have described this for Jalen Hurts as a no excuse year. Like, this isn't the year you go into it with, well, Jalen Hurts needs a second year in the system to really be good. No. He's gotten experience. The most of all the offensive coordinators he's had to this point, this is the guy with the most experience combined. This is the guy with the most experience taking over that position. He also has position experience play calling, game planning. So all that with Kellen Moore is huge, not to mention the weapons at his disposal, and the biggest difference there being Saquon Barkley. And I love one of my favorite things that has put me in such a great headspace coming out of camp or going in at this point in camp is the idea of Jalen Hurts throwing to Saquon Barkley and them making a point of emphasis to do that. So I am very excited. I'm in a great space right now when it comes to what the Philadelphia Eagles can do.
Yeah, I'm fired up. Where is your head at with Jalen? You kind of just mentioned, I mean, this is a no excuse season. It always feels like that third year after a massive MVP-like season is such an indicator of where this quarterback's going to go long-term, because the Eagles really, since Donovan McNabb, they've had a lot of 2022 type seasons for a quarterback. You look at Michael Vick in 2010, you could say Nick Foles 2013, Carson Wentz 2017. Feels like when you look at those guys the following year, they don't dramatically drop off like Wentz did in 2020, but it's a little bit of a regression. And then year three is kind of a big indicator of, okay, was that a flash in the pan, or is this somebody that's going to sustain success like McNabb did? And with Jalen, I think he will end up closer to McNabb when it comes to 2022 wasn't a flash in the pan, but we really have not seen that in over a decade. So I agree with you. I think this year is going to be massive for Jalen.
Yeah, I look at it like this. A lot of people over the last 6 months or so, maybe a little more, have compared Jalen Hurts' situation to Carson Wentz's situation. Right. And I took the Carson Wentz bait hook, line, and sinker when he was playing at the level he was playing at. I mean, anytime, a lot of us did. Anytime a guy that young plays like he's that experienced, you can't help but buy in. There was certainly some red flags, but the ultimate red flag was just between the ears. Carson Wentz didn't have it, whether it came to taking criticism, whether it came to not being able to recover from a previous mistake, whether it was trying to play hero ball to make up for all the previous mistakes by the entire team in one quarter. And that's just not the way you go about it. And to me, Jalen Hurts, the biggest difference and the biggest reason I have confidence in him, and the biggest reason I was such a supporter, like a lot of us, of a $250 million deal for him, was because if you were going to invest in anybody in Philadelphia sports, Jalen Hurts is the top of the list in terms of guys that you're looking at going, I bet you that guy right there is the guy that makes it happen. Like, other than a Bryce Harper in baseball, right? You're looking at a guy that's homegrown, a guy to invest in. That guy is Jalen Hurts. The work ethic is certainly there. And I absolutely love, like you're talking about how great it's been going in training camp. One of the things I keep talking about on my own daily podcast is the alternate universe. All right. Let's live in the alternate universe. Let's live in a world where Jalen Hurts is
trust
not.
me, Mark, everybody knows in this podcast, I'm a what if guy. I never stop talking about the alternate universes.
I love it. Just general in life. I think the best thing you can give another person is a great perspective. Sure. And when you try to have a great perspective about this Eagles season, you have to think about, or this Eagles training camp, is you have to think about, well, okay, this is what they're doing. What if they weren't? What if Jalen Hurts wasn't grasping the offense as well as he is? What if Kellen Moore is saying, well, instead of words like phenomenal with Jalen Hurts grasping the offense, what if he's using words like, it's a work in progress, everything's new, and they're all, tempering our expectations when it comes to what Jalen Hurts can be doing this season. They're not doing that because everything is clicking right now. And the idea of Jalen Hurts getting his own fingerprints on this offense is first off, it might seem common sense to some people, but it's a brilliant move by Kellen Moore, because any animosity that could be there, not even animosity, maybe that's even too strong a word, any bad blood that could be in Jalen Hurts right now about the whole Brian Johnson situation, moving on from an offensive coordinator that virtually had no power last year, and also who was Jalen Hurts' guy, firing him, keeping Sirianni, and then bringing in this other guy, Kellen Moore, who now has all the power. Jalen Hurts a very easy storyline to see coming this season could have been, well, Jalen's got some bad blood towards the Eagles because what they did to Brian Johnson. But no, Kellen Moore gave him the opportunity to take control of this offense as well and help organize that offense. And I think that's a brilliant thing by Kellen Moore.
Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They have the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Once again, that's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Well, and Mark, if you read, Tim McManus came out with a story this morning shedding a little more in-depth light about the Hurts-Siriannii rift last year, and it had to do exactly with what you're talking about. Jalen felt like there was an over-reliance on the vertical passing game. Of course, he wasn't really that healthy either, so he couldn't use his mobility as much. Wanted more power at the line of scrimmage, more horizontal plays over the middle as well. And I think that's the difference is he, kind of like Carson Wentz back in the day, did not trust his system, didn't trust his support system around him. So he pressed. He played hero ball last year. Why I think I agree with you that Hurts won't end up with the Wentz timeline is because the Eagles made dramatic change fast enough where they are allowing him to do that now in the Kellen Moore system. Nick Sirianni did kind of take a back seat in his role with the offense, and they made dramatic change personnel-wise, like bringing in a Saquon Barkley, not letting a Jason Kelce absence affect them as much as maybe it would have in the past. So I'm with you in that sense that I think they made dramatic change fast enough where you're saving this quarterback, because last year was kind of like Carson in 2018, 2019, where he still didn't fall off, but you could see where some of the crumbling could have started. And if you didn't fix it, like they didn't, you got the result you did.
It was an epic collapse, as we all know. And looking back on it, and listening to Nick Sirianni recently talk about how he took all the accountability and took all the blame for it. That's a nice thing. It's good that he did that. If you're a player that was in that locker room last year, you better be looking in the mirror too, because that's coach speak. It's great that the coach is saying it. You'd rather him say it than not say it. But every player knows they could have played at a much higher standard and a much higher level last year. And Jalen Hurts is one of the guys at the top of that list. One thing I did learn going through the whole Carson Wentz fiasco was that if you're a quarterback, you can't be part of the problem. That's the one thing. If you're a franchise guy that's really going to be the guy, you can't be part of it. Carson Wentz was part of the problem. Jalen Hurts last year was part of the problem, but I believe his work ethic, his overall ability will get him back to that MVP conversation, like he's been for 30 of the last 48,
right.
44 games. That's
well, Mark,
pretty damn
if you
good.
look at, he definitely was part of the problem at the end of the year. And unlike Carson, I think he recognizes his faults, his part of the issue last year. But even when you look at the end of the year, it really was just a couple really bad games. I mean, I would point to the Seattle game, the New York game at the end, and then the playoff game. But outside of that, you're right. I mean, he's been an MVP the majority of the time.
Here's something that really jumped out to me. It was before the open training camp session at the Link. Jalen Hurts was asked about how he's going to cut down on his turnovers. And it was kind of like the thing, like if you're trying to avoid doing something you know you shouldn't be doing, you don't even want to talk about it. You don't even want it in your head. So he tried to move on from it as quick as possible. But one of the things I found very interesting in his answer, he talked about doing what he's coached to do. Doing what he's coached to do. So I kind of talk about this quad of blame last year when it came to Jalen Hurts and his faults. One was Jalen Hurts. You obviously blame him because he's the guy throwing the ball. Don't throw the ball deep down the field in Seattle when all you need is a couple to bleed the clock a little bit in the fourth quarter. Talking about the first interception, not the last one that ended the game. But that was one. The other is Nick Sirianni for game planning. The other is Brian Johnson for play calling. And the other is Jeffrey Lurie and the analytics department of the Eagles. How many cooks are in the kitchen of Jalen Hurts telling him the way he should go about playing the quarterback position?
It gave me 2020 vibes, Mark, where they just hired all these, how he was forcing Doug to have this guy from San Francisco in and this guy from this system, West Coast, spread. And they were bringing in so many guys. And I think that also messed with Carson. And he lost trust kind of like Jalen did. But again, I think the Eagles made the right moves this year to reinstill that trust where, like you're saying, Jalen feels like he can buy back into just being coached and doing what they say. Because like you said, against Seattle and a lot last year, he wasn't doing that. But another question for you, like in this conversation, we see how often the NFL, like quickly there's turnover with play callers. If they have any sort of success, another team snatches them up as their head coach. Do you think it is sustainable, though, the current setup the Eagles have where they're almost sidelining their head coach from a schematic standpoint? Because if Kellen Moore has success this year, like he'll probably be a coaching candidate next year. And you just have to keep having that kind of turnover. That's why I kind of like my head coach being a play caller at times.
Oh, so do I. And I also, you know what else I like? I like it when my head coach grows in power and his power doesn't diminish.
It's being reduced. That's what I'm nervous about.
That's it. It's a very vicious cycle the Eagles could get themselves into. And for all the reasons you just laid out there, because I can't think of any situation in the NFL, at least in recent memory, last 20 years or so, where a non-interim head coach, so the Antonio Pierce deal in the Raiders, that's an exception because he was an interim coach. He won the job through the season. So they're not going to fire Nick Sirianni if the Eagles are 7-1. All right. They're going to see it through. Let's say they go to an NFC championship game. Let's say they go to another Super Bowl. They win or they lose. There's no way they're going to fire Nick Sirianni and go, all right, Kellen Moore, because we're going to lose Kellen Moore. We better promote him to head coach. And they're not going to keep him with the title of assistant head coach. Like, that's not happening. So it's a vicious cycle that the Eagles could have definitely put themselves in. Now, if Kellen Moore gets hired somewhere else, that does mean that the Eagles most likely had one hell of a year. At least the offense had one hell of a year.
Which I think they will.
I do as well. But I don't know if this is something that, and I know there was a report from Marcus Hayes at Inquirer.com talking about how Jeffrey Lurie looks at Nick Sirianni as if he's an Andy Reid type, like he could be the next Andy Reid. Yeah. So are they trying to teach Nick Sirianni this particular style of offense before Kellen Moore goes somewhere else? I like that. These are the avenues.
4 years in, though, Mark. That's my problem with
that's crazy. And,
I agree.
These are the avenues my brain goes down. And when it comes to Sirianni, though, this is the analogy I use. I mean, we all remember when Howie Roseman was put in the broom closet during the final year of Chip Kelly. Nick Sirianni, I'm not saying he is in the broom closet. All I'm saying is he is closest. He's the closest person the Eagles have put to that broom closet since Howie Roseman that year.
But that's the thing. And Mark, I do think that for this current season, the setup they have is going to work. But again, I'm a long-term perspective kind of guy. And like you're mentioning, I don't know how you're going to keep doing this where Jalen Hurts has had so many different play callers throughout his career. Is that your long-term plan where you're going to keep doing that over and over? And maybe if you had one kind of system in place with Nick, that transition would be okay. But as you're mentioning, like they're throwing him a whole new offense. It's not Nick's offense anymore. So is that going to be the case every time you have a new coordinator?
It's what it feels like. That's the vicious cycle. I don't know if after this, if the Eagles do have a wonderful season, if their thought is, all right, hey, Nick, you know what? You started out as the play caller and you started out as the game planner. Are you ready to take those on now that you got this experience next to Kellen Moore? You ready to take that on again?
It's bold, but I think, Mark, eventually they'll have to, in my opinion, if I was Jeffrey Lurie, I would eventually do that because I need my head coach long-term to be a play caller, and I need to see if he's going to sink or swim. So in my opinion, I would do that eventually, even if it does end in him sinking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a scary thing. You do think about somebody taking on their first job, and he took on all the responsibility, a play caller, game planner, and all that stuff. And a couple of weeks into it, when then this isn't for me, and then he had the flower power speech, and somehow this team made the playoffs after that. But I will say one thing that I do look at with Nick Sirianni, I think he does have his finger on the pulse of the locker room. I think players do like him. I think players do respect him. The biggest knock on him, though, again, is the dwindling amount of responsibility he's had since he's taken over. People talk about John Harbaugh. People talk about Dan Campbell and all this stuff. If Nick Sirianni would have started out in the same role or the same version of a head coach, same version of a head coach that he is right now, I wouldn't have as negative a take on Nick Sirianni. But the fact that it was like, nah, I'm not going to call plays. I'm just going to game plan. Nah, I'm not going to game plan. I'm going to. I don't even know what I'm going to do. This other guy's running the thing I was really kind of running. Now I'm just going to – now I'm the – people use the term CEO head coach. I like the term regional manager head coach. And with Nick Sirianni, I've kind of come more along the lines of a guidance counselor head coach.
Sure. No, I totally agree with that.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, I like that. I do think this year they're going to be really good, though. Some of the most talented units I've seen in Eagles history, especially on offense. So definitely excited.
We're talking about the head coach like this, but we're like, the team's going to win like 12 games. It's going to be great.
Because they're just so talented right now. But I don't know. It's a strange situation to be in. Mark, before I let you go, I've been asking all my guests this, and this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but the cornerback battle has been so fascinating for me to watch. Yeah. For you, like, who is your ideal starting three heading into 2024? There's so many options, which is a great problem to have for the first time in a long time.
I think the most ideal for me, I think the most ideal is you have your first round pick as your outside corner.
That's
and he's just, if I was rooting for something, that's what I'm rooting
that's what
for.
I mean.
Yeah, that's what I'm rooting. I'm rooting for Quinyon Mitchell. I'm rooting for Darius Slay. And then when it comes to the nickel corner, you either move Keely Ringo in there or you bring Avonte Maddox back down. But he's been playing a lot of safety at camp as of late, especially with the injury to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. But what I think it's going to be, Keely Ringo starting opposite Darius Slay and Quinyon Mitchell as your slot.
I agree with you for sure. Marc Farzetta joining us on the Locked On Eagles podcast. He's going to be hosting our Locked On Sports Philadelphia pod. Going to be doing our postcast right here on LOE after the games. Again, you can find him on the Farzy Show, Jacob Media. He's all over Philly media. I've been listening to a long time, and Mark, we're really excited to have you on the show, man.
It's a pleasure. We'll have to get together for some espresso and cannoli.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.